burning down the house, light my fire, I'm on fire. Insert your favorite fire theme song here. Hi, I'm Ken Ray. Welcome into episode 209 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. If you've got a Mac or an iPhone, you probably trust Apple. On some level anyway. If you've set up a firewall for your computer, you probably trust that too. But do you trust Apple to decide what your firewall should stop and what it shouldn't? Patrick Wardle joins us today to talk about a surprising and, troubling move from Apple on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. When good guys find bad things, let's just say it's good that it's good guys that find them. Apple has been letting a lot of its apps and processes bypass firewalls on Macs just like yours, set up by people just like you. Patrick Wardle once worked for the NSA. He is currently an Apple security researcher for the enterprise device management firm Jamf. On his own, he runs a Mac security site called Objective-C.com. That is Objective-SEE, Objective-C.com. And he's the good guy who found the firewall issue, and I got to talk to him about it. So if we could, I want to start just really basic here, because I don't want us to miss the potential importance of this. So let's just go back to the very beginning. What does a firewall do?
Yeah, so you can think of a firewall as a tool, a security tool, a network security tool that generally monitors and generally also controls incoming and outgoing traffic. So you can think of it as sitting on your computer, and as traffic either comes into your computer or goes out of your computer, the firewall can examine it. Generally, there's pre-established rules or rules that the user has created to allow or block certain types of traffic. So in a nutshell, that is what a firewall is. Okay.
What's funny is I was doing another show just a few days ago, and I was trying to remember the name of a movie about hacking that involves somebody taking like an iPod into a place and exfiltrating information. It was a Harrison Ford movie, and funny enough, I believe it was called Firewall.
That would be a fitting name.
Yeah, there you go. And one of the reasons I think about that is because when we think about firewalls, I tend to think of those as like enterprise level things, or sometimes Harrison Ford will do a movie about one. In reality, though, who should actually be running a firewall, like in real life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, yes, there are many types of firewalls. There are enterprise firewalls. There are hardware-based firewalls. There's software-based firewalls that generally run on end-user systems. I think everyone should be utilizing firewalls. They are a very powerful, I would argue, foundational security tool that can really provide a lot of benefits to the enterprise, but also to the end user. We're talking things like privacy, right? You could block traffic going to certain endpoints that maybe you don't want to, emanate from your network. And it can also be a very powerful utility to indirectly detect new malware. Imagine malware gets onto your system. Malware can do that through a variety of ways. For example, exploits, perhaps malicious attachment, perhaps a user inadvertently downloads and runs one from a site. But the majority of malware, once it gets on your system, it'll try to connect out, beacon out, as we say, to a server's command and control server, kind of checking in and saying, what do you have for me? And generally, the attacker will then give the malware commands, hey, exfiltrate these kind of files. Or, even in the case of ransomware, we've seen ransomware that will connect out to a server to grab the encryption key to encrypt all the user's files. Now, the idea is the firewall would be able to see that traffic and hopefully identify it as unauthorized traffic or traffic it does not recognize and block it, perhaps thwarting the malware, even if the malware is brand new, never been seen before. So I think that's really kind of a good example of why I think everybody should be running firewall, both for privacy reasons and security reasons.
And do we have any idea how many people actually do? Like what percentage of either just computer users in general or Mac users specifically, since this is SecureMac?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I will point out, though, that firewalls are a little bit more of kind of a high touch or maybe a power user type of utility, because the unfortunate thing is when a firewall detects traffic it doesn't recognize, it's generally going to alert the user and say, hey, process ABC is trying to connect to server XYZ. And the average user might not really care about that, might just click allow. So I would imagine the majority of power users or those that are very concerned about either their security and privacy are both familiar with and utilize firewalls. But I would be surprised if the general public makes use of them. And that's not to fault the general public. As I just said, you kind of have to have some understanding about packets and protocols, network endpoints to really effectively utilize a firewall. So that might be one of the reasons why more users don't adopt them.
So I appreciate the primer on firewalls, and I hope our listeners do as well. The reason we're talking about this today, though, is Apple, for some reason, has exempted a number of its own apps and processes from abiding by the rules set up by firewalls, or rules really that users set up for firewalls. First of all, I mean, is that correct? Is that sort of the gist of what we've been hearing over the past week or so?
Yeah, exactly. And so let me take a brief step back to kind of talk about the genesis of this, or kind of why we're having a discussion about this today. So in previous versions of macOS, software developers, third-party developers could create a comprehensive firewall that you run on your Mac, so a software-based or host-based firewall, using something called network kernel extensions, or NKEs. This was a framework Apple provided that firewall developers could leverage. And once you created a firewall that utilized an NKE or network kernel extension, all traffic coming in and out of the box would be routed through your client, but again, leverage the NKE. So your firewall could comprehensively make decisions whether to allow or block traffic. And again, the keyword here is all traffic. Moving to Catalina and most recently Big Sur, Apple has moved towards deprecating kernel extensions for a variety of security reasons, which do make sense. So what Apple had to do, though, was create alternative frameworks that third-party developers, security developers, firewall creators could still leverage so that they could move their code out of the kernel and leverage Apple's new user mode frameworks. So the new user mode framework is called the Network Extension Framework. And at a start, it looks very similar to the frameworks, the NKEs that Apple provided in the kernel. So basically, if you want to create a firewall, you tell the operating system, please route all traffic through me. I'm going to leverage this new network extension framework. And it appeared that Apple did exactly that. The operating system did exactly that. Unfortunately, a closer examination revealed that a large number of Apple's applications and system daemons would bypass or would be exempt from routing traffic through any network extension client, any firewall. This is obviously rather problematic because the point of a firewall is to comprehensively be able to monitor traffic. And if Apple is providing exemptions for this, the firewall, I'm not going to say is useless, but it's definitely weakened. And again, the problem also was, the old version that Apple provided, the NKEs, worked comprehensively. The new framework they provided was not. So I'm not sure exactly why Apple made this decision. One point is maybe simply usability. A lot of the daemons and applications that the operating system decides to exempt from being routed through any firewalls are necessary for legitimate system functionality. And if they would be blocked by a firewall, that could cause problems. So I think that's probably Apple's reasoning. They just chose usability over security, which is unfortunately a common decision.
So if I'm following your findings correctly, though, the problem is it's potentially not just, your Apple computer and Apple services that can talk to one another. Because I mean, I get that. If Apple's like, look, we're setting up all this stuff where, Apple News Plus and Apple Music and iCloud and things like that. We don't want somebody who is relying on our services to accidentally lock themselves out of our services. And that's all fair. I mean, they should probably be more upfront about it, but okay, that would be fair. The problem is you've actually run a little test that proves that even if you're just talking about Apple services, you have proven that it is possible for people to use what Apple has done to a negative effect.
Yeah, exactly. So let me take a minute to kind of expand upon all of that. So Apple's, we assume their viewpoint is, yes, these are essential service. We don't want users to be able to block that. That's problematic for three reasons. The first reason is privacy. There's probably some number of users that don't want all this information going to Apple. And we're not, unfortunately, just talking about essential system daemons and system processes. Apple also exempts things like the App Store or Apple Maps. Maybe users who are sensitive about sharing their location with Apple, if they ever accidentally launch the map application or another application turns around and tries to load something in Maps, that information goes to Apple. And again, Apple's saying, yeah, generally users are going to want to be able to use the map application. And if they block it with a firewall, it's not going to work. But I think that decision should be ultimately left up to the user because as it stands now, users that are very cautious or care a lot about their privacy really don't have much of an alternative. Another kind of interesting examination or point that Apple may have not considered is just data usage and bandwidth. So a lot of users will tether their laptops to, for example, a cell phone when they're traveling, and previously have been able to use firewalls as a way to block certain system services, for example, updates from downloading while they are traveling. Then they get home, deactivate the firewall, and let the installs, which may be several gigs, go on. This matter, the way Apple has designed this new framework is that specific approach is no longer feasible. So users are concerned that the operating system may be eating into their data usages. And this is interesting because Google actually recently got sued for something very similar, maybe not allowing their traffic through firewalls, but in the background, downloading large data without prompting the user that would eat into the user's data caps and in some cases cost the users a lot of money. And then the thing that's closest, I would say, nearest and dearest to my heart is obviously the security angle. So anytime an operating system or an application or some component has an exemption list or an allow list, it's likely that malware or a malicious-minded adversary could leverage this and thereby inherit the same level as trust as the items in that exception list. So that's exactly what I showed and was very trivially able to prove. So the idea was, imagine malware has gotten onto your system and it wants to, as we talked about, beacon out to a command and control server for tasking or to download other tools, all sorts of malicious activities. Well, if it can find a way to leverage the exempted applications, the daemons on that list, and have them perform the network activities on their behalf, well, Apple's basically given the malware then a way to circumvent any third-party firewall. And that's exactly what I was able to do. So it was pretty trivial to find a way where I could basically kindly ask, and I say that in quotes, one of the trusted components to generate arbitrary network traffic for me, allowing me to exfiltrate a file off the system. And even though I had multiple firewalls running that leveraged the new network extension framework, since the traffic was originated via one of the trusted and one of the exempted application system daemons, the firewalls never even saw the traffic, and thus the malware was trivially able to exfiltrate that traffic out. I did a test on a previous version of the operating system via a firewall that leveraged the old method, the network kernel extensions. And of course, as expected, the firewall in that case was able to detect and thwart the attack. So this is, again, kind of problematic as we're really not moving forward in this scenario. We're almost taking a step back. So from a point of view of a security researcher and a firewall author myself, this is rather unfortunate.
It's honestly, I mean, when you say it that way, and I've read a few articles about this, just in the Apple News stuff that I do and also in preparation to talk to you today. What's amazing, though, the way you just described that, the phrase that comes to mind is a backdoor for the good guys is a backdoor for the bad guys, too. And I can't remember where we've heard that, Patrick. It feels like I might have heard that from somewhere, I don't know, around the Mountain View area, around the Sunnyvale area. There's a town over there. I can't remember exactly, but it feels like that might be something that they'd have been hip to.
Yeah, there's definitely a rabbit hole that we could kind of go down. But yes, I agree. There's definitely some parallels. whenever you have a mechanism that you believe will only be utilized by the good men, the good women, the good guys, however you want to phrase that, the reality is that's generally going to be open to abuse by malicious-minded adversaries, right? Encryption backdoors, great example. Operating system exemption lists. I mean, and to briefly kind of reiterate this, at the Objective by the Sea conference version 2.0, I gave a talk about abusing another exemption list that Apple had in their operating system, which allowed for the generation of synthetic clicks to do things like click through security alerts or bypass certain authentication mechanisms by generating programmatic alerts. This is something that Apple seeks to prevent arbitrary applications and malware from doing, because malware often uses this trick to try to click through various prompts. But again, they had this undocumented exception list that I was able to leverage, and again, have those trusted components do my work, my bidding on the behalf of the operating system would trust. So there's even like a history of malicious-minded adversaries, or at least Patrick, using Apple exception lists to bypass security mechanisms. And so, again, as I mentioned, it's a little disheartening to see that this was the route they took. I don't think there's any malice here. I wouldn't even use the term backdoor. I just think the creators of the network extension framework perhaps didn't think about all the security repercussions, or if they did, chose usability above privacy and security, which, for Apple, that's a little bit unfortunate.
More with Patrick in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Chances are you're doing more with your computer today than you were at the beginning of the year. Thanks to all the staying in and social distancing, the working from home, the schooling from home. I'm not saying you're doing anything risky with your computer. I will say, though, now would be a particularly bad time for anything to happen to it. You need a good anti-malware solution like MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then when you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first, watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. And now more of our conversation with Patrick Wardle. Well, something you and I have been doing for the past few months is keeping up with the project that you're working on. I know I interviewed you on the Checklist a few months back, but talk to people about the book you're writing and let us know how it's going.
Yeah, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about. So I am creating a free open source book titled The Art of Mac Malware. Volume 1 is analysis. And the goal of the book is really to provide a comprehensive community resource of how to effectively analyze Mac malware. So it's really interesting. Starts by talking about, what is Mac malware? How can it infect your system? How does it persist? And then what does it try to do once it's on your system? For example, perhaps bypass a firewall to exfiltrate files. The remainder of the book then talks about how we as malware analysts are able to pull apart or deconstruct these malicious samples to figure out the capabilities and how to provide detection capabilities, a digital vaccine, maybe, as you would term. And so again, really the goal is just to provide an educational resource that's free. So the book's website is taomm.org. That's short for theartofmacmalware.org. I post new chapters every few weeks. I'm actually just wrapping it up. I have a self-imposed deadline the end of this year to complete the book. And the good news is the second to last chapter is just about done. And then the last chapter, which is a comprehensive case study, which applies everything the book has talked about, really provides a great walkthrough of how a malware analyst, a computer virologist, let's say, would comprehensively analyze a piece of Mac malware. So if you're interested in learning about Mac malware, even at a basic level, or you really want to get into the nitty gritty and learn about the tools and the techniques to deconstruct malware, definitely check out the book. Again, it's free. I mentioned it's kind of open source, and by that I mean anyone can comment on the content. So if there's a mistake or something that's not clear, you can simply add a comment that I'll respond to, update the content. So again, the goal is really just to create this comprehensive free community resource for those who are interested in learning more about Mac malware and analyzing threats facing, unfortunately, all us Mac users.
And the address again is taomm.org. I will say really quickly, it leaves me after the first part, but I found the first part very informative. So even if you think, well, that sounds too far along for me, I think there honestly is something there for a lot of people. So if you're listening to this show, I do think you could at least benefit from the first chapter or two, because there's just it's just really informative. Let's get back to what's going on with Apple and the firewall, because one of the things that we really like to do on the checklist is if somebody brings a problem, we want to bring a solution too, because it's kind of depressing to be like, well, world's going to end. Talk to you next week. Since Apple has given itself this pass, is there any way to sort of ratchet down these permissions, or are we, sort of where they've left us?
So that's a great question. And I think this is something that there are various solutions that can provide various degrees. So the first thing I should point out is that I specifically looked at this in the context of firewalls. I haven't looked at it in how it impacts VPNs. So that might be one option, using a VPN and traffic you ultimately control. There is also a different type of firewall. It's called a PF, or packet filter firewall. It's kind of like an old school firewall that kind of sits at a lower level of the operating system. And my research has indicated that these old school firewalls still provide more comprehensive, all traffic is routed through these firewalls. So Apple's exception list only applies to the more modern firewalls that leverage their network extension. Unfortunately, these more modern firewalls are the ones that provide more features, more capabilities, maybe URL-based blocking, et cetera, because the higher level frameworks allow a firewall to do that. Now, the good thing is I've been in direct communications with Apple. I actually filed a bug report before Big Sur came out, pointing out what I believed was an issue and some of the, I believed, impacts of this. We talked about the privacy issues. We talked about the data bandwidth usage and also the security issues. And their security team seemed very receptive to my points and, anecdotally, seemed to agree. I'm not trying to put words in their mouth, but they definitely recognize and the points I'm making and the issues that other users are bringing up and other third-party firewall vendors are definitely being heard. So I'm actually very optimistic that Apple is going to remedy this, or at least take a good hard look at this in a new light. I'm forever optimistic, maybe naively so, but I would not be surprised if we see this exception list disappear. That would be, again, best news, because it would allow these more modern third-party firewall products to be able to return to their former glory and be able to comprehensively filter out traffic. It would also empower the users to make the decisions. I personally believe that's really the best. I think Apple sometimes believes that they know what's best, and oftentimes they do. But I think in this scenario, it should be nice for the user to make the decision if a user wants to be able to make that decision about what traffic goes to Apple and what traffic does not. So, fingers crossed. I'm very optimistic for 2021, right? We have a new president. We're going to have a COVID vaccine, and hopefully we'll also have comprehensive firewall monitoring capabilities.
I think if he had run on that, or if either of them had run on that, it might have been a landslide. Let me ask you one other thing really quickly. It sounds to me, and maybe it's because, this is kind of one of the things that we do on this show, that this also sounds like a call to be, as vigilant about best practices as ever. I mean, you gave the example of, using or malware being able to bypass the firewall to wreak havoc online that it shouldn't. I'm guessing we're talking about the usual stuff. I mean, don't click on links in messages or emails, run a good anti-malware suite, watch for unusual activity on your computer. I mean, it sounds like until all of that happens, I mean, I guess best practices are called best practices for a reason, but those best practices could actually help in this accidental issue, let's say, that Apple has set up.
Yeah, Ken, I like that term you use, vigilance. For end users, I think that's a really important part. We're kind of talking about an in-depth or multi-stage attack, where one of those steps is the ability to connect out to a remote command and control server to exfiltrate data or get more tasking. Obviously, there's some prerequisites that have to obviously happen before an attack gets to that stage. And the most notable and obvious is the system has to be infected. So I think exactly like you said, hit the nail on the head. The best way to avoid this issue in the first place is not to get infected. And that does sound kind of obvious, but I think that's also good to reiterate. So things like, don't click on random email attachments. Make sure the software you're downloading is from trusted sites. Make sure you're running the latest version of the operating system with all security patches so that hackers have a harder time utilizing exploits, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that vigilance brings to mind is the fact that I think this is a great example of the relevance, the importance of third-party security researchers. Because if third-party security researchers hadn't uncovered this exception list and created proof of concepts illustrating that malware could use, or rather abuse these exempted applications to generate arbitrary network traffic that was able to circumvent any third-party firewall that utilizes the network extension framework, I don't think Apple would be reconsidering their stance, their approach. This is just the reality of where we're at. I think a lot of times companies implement certain logic and maybe don't think through all the security impacts of that. And so a security-minded researcher might have to bring this to light and help raise public awareness and public outcry, which for better or worse is often the best way to encourage Apple to reconsider their perhaps initial posture.
Well, I gotta say, you hurt my head a little bit every time, but I know you make it stronger as well, and I really appreciate your sharing your time and your expertise with us when you do. Patrick Wardle, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me, and for everyone listening, thank you also for listening. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of 2020, and 2021 will be here before we know it.
You can keep up with Patrick a few ways. You can follow him on Twitter. He is at Patrick Wardle there. That's WARDLE. At Patrick Wardle to follow him on Twitter. I mentioned earlier he's got a website, objective-c.com. He blogs a lot there about Mac security, and he's also got a lot of tools there that are free and open source for both end users and security people. It's objective-c, that is objective-see, objective-c.com. And thanks again to Patrick for joining us today. If you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for today's show, for all the shows that we've done, all 209 of them, and you can actually listen to every one of them right there as well. It all starts in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you like the checklist, would you do us a favor? Hit like or maybe give us a review wherever you happen to catch the show. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.